Have you ever been pushed so far, so silently, that when you finally took a stand, it shocked everyone? Imagine being told to sleep on the floor in your own home, not just by strangers, but by your own family. My name is Emily, and I've always believed in keeping the peace. But what happens when your silence becomes your consent? And your consent becomes your erasure? Stick around, because this isn't just about a bed, it's about respect. And I was done being invisible. The first time I was asked to give up my bed, I didn't argue. I told myself it was temporary, that family helps each other, and I could manage a few uncomfortable nights on the living room floor. But that first night turned into 2, then a week. Then, it just became expected. It happened so casually. One Thursday morning, I came downstairs nursing the low throb of my healing back. Nothing major, just lingering from a minor car accident a few months prior, and found my younger sister Jessica already settled at the kitchen island. She was fresh off her own injury, a recent slip during a yoga class she insisted had, quote, thrown her spine out of orbit. "I'll be staying here while I recover," she said, like it was her birthright. "Mom and Dad said I should use your room. It's closer to the bathroom and softer on my back." I blinked. My room? Mom was already unpacking a set of crisp white sheets. New ones, for Jessica. "You're barely ever home, sweetheart," she added, without making eye contact. "Just sleep on the floor for a bit. It's not a big deal." I was home. I was paying the mortgage. I was the one who'd taken a second job 3 years ago just to refinance this place and keep it from slipping out of their names. I still covered groceries, Wi-Fi, gas, even Jessica's streaming subscriptions. But in that moment, I said nothing, just nodded. That's who I was then, quiet, accommodating, a peacekeeper, even when the war was clearly already waging. That night, I lay curled up on a throw blanket, the hardwood pressing against every fragile part of me. Jessica's laugh echoed down the hallway as she FaceTimed a friend from my bed. I stared at the ceiling and tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that it was only temporary, that I wasn't being erased from my own life one favor at a time. But even then, somewhere deep inside, a new voice had started whispering, "This isn't right, and you know it. What would you have done in my place? Would you have spoken up? Or, like me, waited until silence wasn't a virtue, but a trap?" I didn't say anything the next morning either, or the morning after that. Instead, I adjusted, quietly. If my family could pretend I wasn't paying the bills, then fine. Let's see how they managed when I stopped. It started small. The automatic mortgage payment I'd been making each month, gone. I logged into the bank account, canceled the transfer, and didn't breathe a word. It wasn't out of revenge. It was about math. Why keep funding a place that no longer respected my space? The living room had become my designated corner. I kept my pillow and a rolled-up comforter neatly tucked behind the couch by day and unfurled them at night like some obedient ghost in my own house. Meanwhile, Jessica lounged in my room, surrounded by shopping bags. One afternoon, I came home from work early and caught her unboxing a new tablet on my desk. She looked up mid-snap of an Instagram story and grinned. "Dad gave me his card," she chirped. "He said it's technically your account, but you probably wouldn't mind since you've been working so much." My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jessica, younger by 5 years and forever the family's soft-voiced darling, had a way of turning selfishness into sweetness. A talent, really. One that everyone around her indulged. I started keeping receipts, not to confront them, yet, but to anchor myself in truth. Every DoorDash notification, every nail salon charge, the home decor packages addressed to Jessica Marie Bennett, paid for using an emergency card that I'd originally opened when Dad was out of work 3 years ago. I watched, quietly, as my contributions turned into their indulgences, and still, no one asked if I was okay sleeping on the floor. No one offered the guest room upstairs, even though it sat empty, dusty, and fully furnished. Jessica claimed it was too drafty. One night, I overheard her telling our mom that the bed in my room, her room now, had a better mattress. Patricia didn't correct her, just nodded and handed her a glass of wine. My back ached in dull pulses from the floor, so I started sleeping on an air mattress. It squeaked with every shift. A nightly soundtrack to the quiet betrayal. I began seeing things for what they were, not what I had once believed. My parents weren't just ignoring me. They were comfortable with my discomfort, and Jessica, she was thriving. Shopping, redecorating, posting mirror selfies from my room with captions like, "Healing vibes only." I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just calculating. Because if respect wasn't being offered freely, then maybe it had to be reclaimed, with interest. Have you ever felt yourself slowly disappear from a place you helped build? Like you were being edited out of your own story? That's exactly what was happening to me. And soon, I'd decide I wasn't going to be written off anymore. The first thing I noticed was the paint. It was soft lavender, rolling smoothly across the walls. I had once painted a muted teal during a particularly hopeful spring 3 years ago. I had chosen the shade carefully, pairing it with pale gray curtains and warm fairy lights, my little sanctuary after long shifts at work and silent dinners with my family. Now those fairy lights were gone. The curtains, replaced by gauzy ivory ones Jessica had ordered online. She stood in the center of my room, her room now, dressed in an oversized t-shirt and yoga shorts, humming as she smoothed paint strokes near the ceiling. I stood in the doorway, holding a bag of groceries and pretending I didn't feel the sharp twist in my chest. "Hey," she said without looking, "can you pass me that step stool?" I left it by the closet. I handed it over. And still, I said nothing. Jessica didn't ask if I wanted to keep the teal. She didn't ask if I'd mind her changing the bedspread or replacing the bookshelf with a vanity. She simply assumed, like they all did, that I would adjust, accommodate, absorb the change like old wallpaper being peeled off without ceremony. I watched her tack up a corkboard where my framed photos had been. My degree, which once hung proudly above the desk, was now shoved into a pile in the corner, along with a box of books, a framed picture of me and my friend Lisa, and a scented candle I'd gotten for Christmas. I took the box without a word and carried it back to the living room, my new bedroom. Later that evening, I came back from work to find my mother standing in the hallway, admiring Jessica's progress. Her arms were folded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "She's really making it her own," Patricia said, nodding with approval. "She is," I replied, careful with my tone. Mom glanced sideways. "You're hardly ever home, Emily, and Jess needs a peaceful space while she recovers. You understand that, don't you?" There it was. The statement so casually dropped it might have been mistaken for kindness, but it wasn't. It was a revision, a small red-line edit of my existence in this house. "I'm always here," I said gently. "I sleep here every night. I pay the bills. I clean up. I work 2 jobs and come home to this house." Patricia frowned as if my correction made things inconvenient. "You've always been independent, not really the type to nest, like Jessica. She's more domestic. You know?" I swallowed hard, the words pressing behind my teeth like steam behind glass. Domestic? She was sleeping in my bed, using my skincare products, spending my money on candles and comforters and calling it hers. And suddenly, that made her more domestic? More what? Worthy? They weren't just shifting my furniture anymore. They were shifting the narrative. Jessica's room. Jessica's sanctuary. Emily? She was barely ever around. How quickly history rewrites itself when you don't fight for the pen. That night, I stared at the ceiling from the creaky air mattress, the box of my displaced belongings tucked at my feet. In my hand, I held the old teal paint chip card I'd found wedged behind the dresser, one I had picked out with such care all those years ago. The irony was bitter, because that teal, calm, cool, gentle, wasn't me anymore. Not now. Now, something was stirring, a slow, quiet surge of something stronger than frustration. It wasn't rage. It was resolve. If they could erase me from the room, what else could they erase next? That question, whispered in the dark, settled deep inside me like a spark. I didn't know exactly what I would do next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to fade quietly anymore. I started with the printer. Not the most dramatic choice, I know, but it mattered. It had always been mine, paid for with my first freelance bonus, and used, without acknowledgement, by everyone else in the house. I unplugged it from the corner of the office and slid it gently into the back seat of my car. No one noticed, so I moved on. The files from the hallway cabinet, tax returns, investment statements, emergency contacts, disappeared next. I took my time sorting them into locked folders and backing them up onto a private drive. Then I sealed them into a fireproof safe and stored it under the false floorboard in the attic, the same one my father used to hide Christmas gifts when I was little. No one noticed that either. Over the next week, I became a ghost in my own home, but this time by design. I worked my shifts, smiled politely at dinner, and made mental checklists of the items I'd provided that everyone else took for granted. My name was on every utility account. My credit card linked to every automatic payment. The Wi-Fi, the gas, the water, even Jessica's music subscription was routed through my Apple ID. So I started unplugging. One by one, I logged in and began the quiet rollback. The Wi-Fi? Scheduled for disconnection on a Tuesday morning, coincidentally, the same day Jessica was hosting a virtual Pilates class from my room. The gas? Switched off with a polite notice of renovation-related temporary closure. I even added a cheerful emoji to the customer service rep's chat, just to keep things cordial. The water, I hesitated on. I'd lived in that house for most of my life, after all. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't complicit anymore either. I cut the automatic payment. If they wanted the tap to keep running, someone else could put their name on the bill. Meanwhile, I started reclaiming my belongings, carefully, quietly. The books I loved were no longer shared across 3 rooms. The skillet I'd splurged on last fall, after weeks of overtime, was no longer available for Jessica's morning detox brunches. My framed photos, my grandmother's quilt, even my spare set of sheets, gone, packed in vacuum bags and stored in the trunk of my car. It wasn't theft, it was inventory control. By week's end, the only trace of me in that house was the air mattress. And even that, I folded up and stowed behind the couch each morning like it owed the living room rent. One afternoon, as I unplugged the last of my desktop devices and replaced them with decoys, my father wandered in. "Everything okay, Em? You've been rearranging things a lot lately." "I'm just simplifying," I said with a smile. "Less clutter?" He nodded, distracted by the mail in his hand. "Good for you. We've been meaning to streamline around here." We? They still believed it was a collective, a family, a shared system. But that illusion was breaking, silently and efficiently, like a circuit being cut wire by wire. They had relied on me, silently, utterly, completely, and they hadn't even realized it. Until now, because soon they were going to wake up to a house that didn't run on gratitude, it ran on my name. And when the system started shutting down, they'd learn what silence really felt like. The rain began sometime before dawn. It tapped against the windows in soft, steady rhythms, a hush over the house that might have felt cozy if it weren't so cold. The kind of chill that creeps into your bones when the thermostat reads error and your shower sputters dry. I was already awake when it started. Not from discomfort. I had spent the night at Lisa's, my coworker and quiet ally, but from anticipation. I knew what that morning would bring. I'd planned for it. Still, I imagined it as I sat at Lisa's breakfast counter, sipping coffee while she stirred scrambled eggs. Back home, Patricia, my mother, would be in the bathroom by now, twisting the shower knob with increasing confusion. She'd check the kitchen sink next, then the boiler. Then, she'd call my father. And then, they'd call me. Right on cue, my phone vibrated. "Mom's cell," flashing on the screen. I let it ring. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Showtime?" I nodded. Act 1. When I finally listened to the voicemail, Patricia's voice was pinched and tight. "Emily, do you know what's going on with the water? Nothing's working, and the house is freezing. Call me back right away." 10 minutes later, another call. This time, my father. We've got a serious issue here. The water's out and the heat's not coming on. Is the account under your name? Can you check?" I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I opened the folder I had prepared weeks ago, a collection of emails, final notices, and closed accounts. I had forwarded every cancellation confirmation to a private inbox. Proof, not revenge, just receipts. The rest of the morning passed in messages. Jessica's came through at 9:13 a.m. "Are you serious right now? No water? I'm supposed to record today." Then, "And why is the Wi-Fi down again?" Followed by, "Emily, answer your phone." Lisa glanced over as I muted the ringer. "They figuring it out?" "They're starting to." I knew my family. They didn't recognize patterns. They recognized pain points, the absence of convenience, the lack of control. It wasn't until noon that Patricia texted me again. This time, just 4 words. "Did you do this?" I stared at those words longer than I expected. There was no hysteria, just something bordering on suspicion. Maybe fear. That was new. I waited another hour before replying. "You might want to check whose name is on the utility accounts." Silence. Then, another message from Dad. "You're on the deed too? Since when?" There it was. The beginning of awareness. Not regret, not accountability, just dawning discomfort. I didn't answer that question either. I wanted them to sit in it first. Let the house hum quiet, with nothing but wind against the window panes. Around 3 p.m., the group text came. "Jessica, this is insane. The house is unlivable. Mom, we're not mad, but we need to talk. Dad, you've made your point, Emily. Let's just sort this out like adults." I read their messages while folding laundry in Lisa's guest room. The quiet hum of her dryer was the only background noise I needed. For the first time in months, I felt calm. They were finally seeing the framework that had held them up for so long. And it wasn't just chipped paint and family meals. It was me, my paycheck, my effort, my silence. That house didn't run on love. It ran on denial. And I had just shut off the fuel. Let them shiver for a while. Let them sit in their borrowed comfort and ask themselves why the floor beneath their feet suddenly felt so cold. I wasn't gone. I had just pulled myself out from under them, and they didn't know how to stand on their own. By the time I walked through the front door again, the silence had thickened into something heavy. The kind of silence that usually follows a storm, or, in this case, precedes one. It was late afternoon. Damp, gray light seeped through the windows, and the air inside felt still, bitterly cold. The boiler, still off. The water, still dry. Jessica was sprawled dramatically across the couch, wrapped in 2 mismatched throws, and wearing an expression of theatrical suffering. A heating pad was pressed to her lower back, its cord trailing uselessly, because, of course, the outlet beside her had been connected to the now-defunct smart strip I had quietly removed last week. She didn't look up when I entered, just groaned. "You have no idea how much pain I'm in," she said, voice hoarse and accusing. "This floor, this couch, this house, it's literally making me worse." I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door. "Hi to you too." Jessica sat up abruptly, wincing for effect. "Don't play nice now. You think you're being clever? Making some kind of statement? Well, congratulations, Emily. You made your sick sister suffer." I raised an eyebrow. "You're not sick. You're entitled." Her mouth fell open like I'd slapped her. "My back injury is real," she snapped. "I have a note from a doctor. And yet somehow," I said, calmly removing my shoes, "you've managed to redecorate a bedroom, host virtual yoga classes, and film skincare tutorials with ring lights plugged into every outlet in my room." She went silent at that, but her eyes flared. "You're punishing me because you're jealous." I blinked. "Jealous? Of what exactly?" "Of how Mom and Dad treat me. Of the attention." "You've always been cold, Emily. Now you're just proving it." I let the words hang in the air. I wasn't going to rise to them. Not anymore. Jessica's tantrums were a performance, and I was done playing audience. That's when our father appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted. Hair mussed, shoulders hunched. He held a stack of mail in one hand and an old coffee mug in the other. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Sure," I said, leaning against the banister. He cleared his throat, already shifting into the role he knew best, the weary patriarch. Reasonable, disappointed, soft-spoken, but bruising when needed. "I think we can all agree," he began, "that this situation has gotten out of hand." I didn't answer. He sighed. "I know it hasn't been perfect, Em. I know you feel overlooked. But this, turning off the water, shutting down the heat, that's not the daughter I raised." There it was, the line meant to sting. I let it sit. Then I smiled, small, slow, deliberate. "No, Dad, it's not the daughter you raised. It's the woman I became after being ignored in my own house." He looked momentarily stunned. I stepped forward, voice still even. You say it's out of hand? You're right. But the part you're missing is this. I didn't create the chaos. I just stopped cleaning it up. He said, softer now. What kind of daughter does this to her family? I didn't flinch. The kind who's been sleeping on the floor while paying the mortgage. The kind who's watched her sister repaint her bedroom without asking. And her parents use her paycheck to fund takeout and throw pillows while calling her a guest in her own home. Behind me, Jessica made a scoffing sound. Oh, come on. I turned to face her. You moved into my room without asking. You threw out my things. And you never once said thank you. Just like you never once paid a bill. Her face flushed, but she said nothing. Dad ran a hand down his face. Look, can we reset? Have a family meeting or something? Talk this through like adults? I folded my arms. I've tried that. You didn't listen. Well, you never said anything this clearly before. No, I replied. I didn't. But I am now. And this is me being clear. I'm not your safety net anymore. The room went quiet. I walked past them both and into the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water from the case of bottled water I'd stashed behind the pantry and sat at the counter. Jessica glared. Dad looked down at the mail again, pretending to read. It was a strange kind of power, silence, when it's intentional. And in that moment, they realized they'd underestimated the one person who never made noise, never asked for space, never demanded recognition. Until now. When Lisa opened the door that night, I didn't even have to say anything. She took one look at me, damp hair from the rain, face blank from emotional fatigue, and pulled me into the kind of hug that didn't ask questions. You came, she said softly, leading me inside. Finally. Her apartment was warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon. A quiet comfort. It wasn't grand, just a small one-bedroom tucked above a bookstore, but it felt like oxygen. And I hadn't realized until that moment how long I'd been holding my breath. I slipped off my coat, and she pointed toward the hallway. The guest room's ready. Clean sheets, towels, all the grown-up hospitality stuff. Lisa, I said quietly, I don't want to impose. She gave me a look. Emily, you have never imposed. Ever. You've let yourself be erased so many times. I'm just glad you're finally drawing the line. We sat at her kitchen table with mugs of tea, mint for her, chamomile for me. I told her everything. Not in the polished, bite-sized versions I'd been offering at work when someone asked how things were going at home, but the raw truth. How they'd taken over my room, how they dismissed my presence, how the very house I worked so hard to protect had been repurposed into someone else's castle, and I was the hired help, only without the paycheck. Lisa listened with the kind of stillness that made you feel heard. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. You're not selfish, Emily. You're self-respecting. There's a difference. I smiled faintly. They don't see it that way. They wouldn't. Not when the version of you they love is the one who quietly sacrifices. Those words stayed with me longer than I expected. Because she was right. My family didn't love me. They loved the version of me who made everything easy, the one who didn't speak up, who cleaned up quietly, who paid, forgave, and folded herself into whatever space they left behind. But the real me? They hadn't seen her in years. Lisa stood up and opened a cabinet. Also, she said, pulling out a small key, this is for you. Front door. The lock sticks sometimes. Just give it a jiggle. Lisa, I'm not staying here permanently. No, she interrupted. You're staying here until you remember how you deserve to be treated? We both laughed, the sound unexpectedly light in the thick night air. Later, lying in the guest bed with clean sheets and actual silence, I let my thoughts wander. No creaky floor beneath me. No voices muffled by closed doors. No passive-aggressive sighs or comments about gratitude and obligations. Just me, and the soft realization that maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to want more than survival. I wasn't selfish. I was recovering. And for the first time in a long time, I had the space to do it. The letter came on a Thursday. Thick envelope. Official stamp. My parents never opened it. It sat on the hallway console table for a full day, slightly askew, balanced between a takeout menu and a candle Jessica had labeled, for stress vibes only. They didn't notice when it disappeared. I had already picked it up on my way in, pure habit really. But when I saw the return address, my fingers tightened. Mortgage Services Group, Foreclosure Division. At Lisa's kitchen table later that evening, I read the letter twice. Then once more, slowly. It was all there. Notice of missed payments, intent to foreclose, options to dispute, boiled down into a polite but firm warning. Pay or lose the house. They hadn't been paying the mortgage, because they had assumed I still was. Lisa watched me quietly from across the table. Are you going to tell them? I stared at the page, oddly calm. Not yet. A part of me wanted to be cruel, to let the process unfold and watch them squirm. But another part, the quieter, stronger part, wanted something else. Not revenge, clarity. 2 days later, I called a meeting. Yes, an actual meeting. I emailed them all because texting was too easy to ignore and invited them to the dining room table at 6 p.m. sharp. The table where we'd once held family dinners, birthday cake nights, arguments about curfews and college majors. That table. I sat at the head. No one questioned it. Jessica arrived last, phone in hand, still rolling her eyes from an argument about her wellness brand being misunderstood online. My father cleared his throat. So what's this about? I slid the envelope across the table. You missed 3 payments on the mortgage. Silence. Mom frowned. Emily, I thought you were still... I stopped 2 months ago. Jessica laughed, short and sharp. Why would you do that? I met her eyes. Because you took my room, used my money, and erased me from the house I've kept standing for years. No one spoke. I opened a folder. This one wasn't about receipts. It was about rights. There's a clause in the deed, I said. You remember when I helped refinance the house 3 years ago? When Dad's credit wasn't strong enough to qualify? He shifted uncomfortably. You were the co-signer. No, I corrected. I became the majority owner. You both signed over 60% equity to me in exchange for the new loan and lower rate. It was legal, binding, not symbolic. Jessica's mouth parted. Wait, you own the house? I nodded. Legally. And now that payments have stopped under your watch, the mortgage company reached out. To me. Patricia's voice was hushed. We didn't know. No, I said quietly. You didn't ask. They looked stunned, not just by the information, but by the delivery. I wasn't angry. I wasn't loud. I was resolute. I closed the folder. Here's what's going to happen. I've already settled the outstanding balance. The house is safe from foreclosure. They all exhaled in collective relief. Then I added, but not from me. Jessica stiffened. What does that mean? It means the backup is gone. The cushion is gone. The invisible support system? Gone. You wouldn't evict your own family, Patricia said. I didn't answer. Because maybe I would. Maybe I already had. They didn't believe me. Not at first. When I handed them the formal notice, typed, dated, notarized, they blinked like it was a prank. Even Jessica laughed. You're kidding, she said. You're not seriously kicking us out. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. You have 10 days. My father read the document like it was written in a foreign language. Where are we supposed to go? My mother scoffed. You think we can just pack up and disappear like renters? You are renters, I said gently. Informal ones. And the arrangement expired the moment you stopped contributing and started erasing me. Jessica stood up so fast her chair screeched. You're unbelievable. No, I said. I'm just done. And I meant it. 10 days later, on a bright, breezy morning that felt entirely unlike the tension it held, they were gone. Mostly. They hadn't gone far. From my window, I watched the bright blue tent rise in the backyard like a defiant flag of protest. Borrowed from my uncle. 2 folding chairs beside it. A cooler. A tangle of extension cords. Jessica documented it on social media like it was an adventure. Family camping trip, her caption read, complete with emojis. The comments were supportive, sympathetic, clueless. Inside, the house was quiet, spacious, mine. I began reclaiming the corners they had taken over. The old office, once a storage room of tangled wires and unpaid bills, became my sanctuary. I painted the walls a rich, stormy gray, Hung soft lights. Moved in the armchair I'd kept in storage since grad school. Shelves lined with books I hadn't touched in years found their way home. And on the window ledge I placed a single photo. A younger me, standing beside the sold sign in front of the house, beaming with unfiltered pride. That girl had dreamed of a peaceful home. She just hadn't known she'd have to fight to protect it from the people inside. Each night I curled up in the reading nook with tea and quiet music, the soft glow of the lamp making the room feel weightless. And outside, the tent stood in contrast, cold, temporary, lacking the one thing they'd always taken for granted, comfort. Neighbors began to notice. One afternoon, Mrs. Carter from next door waved me over as I was collecting the mail. "Everything all right over there?" she asked, nodding toward the backyard. I smiled. "It will be," she nodded. "Takes guts to draw a line." I thought about that word, guts. It didn't feel like bravery. It felt like necessity. Sometimes peace isn't about quiet. It's about knowing when your silence becomes permission. Inside my home, surrounded by space that finally reflected who I was, I felt something I hadn't in months. Relief. Let them camp. Let them complain. Let them learn what it feels like to be on the outside looking in. Because for years, that's exactly where they'd left me. The questions started in whispers, soft at first, cautious, from across the hedge during a morning walk, at the mailbox, in passing, with neighborly smiles and carefully lowered voices. "So, Emily, are they okay out there?" I didn't pretend to misunderstand. I looked toward the backyard, where the sagging blue tent was still pitched beneath the maple tree. A laundry line stretched from the porch post to a tree limb, sagging with wrinkled shirts and towels. "They'll figure it out," I said. That was all I needed to say. It wasn't long before the whispers turned into conversations. Neighbors noticed more than my parents and Jessica thought. The arguments through thin tent walls. The power cord snaking out from the garage without permission. The plastic jugs used for makeshift water supply. But most of all, they noticed the shift. How the daughter who used to wave quietly and rush off to work was now outside more, mowing the lawn, reading on the porch, planting lavender in the front beds. I wasn't hiding anymore. Word spread fast in our little neighborhood. Not through gossip, but through curiosity. It was Mrs. Navarro who finally asked outright. She stopped me one afternoon while I was sweeping the porch. "I hope this isn't too forward," she said gently, "but people are talking. Your sister, your parents, the tent. Did something happen?" I paused, then smiled. "Something overdue happened." She nodded, waiting. So I told her. Not the entire story, not the private details, but enough that I had lived here for years, that I paid the mortgage, that I gave until I was invisible and then kept giving, that when I finally said, "Enough," no one believed me until they had no choice. Mrs. Navarro didn't gasp or judge. She simply touched my arm and said, "Good for you, sweetheart. About time someone stood up for themselves around here." And just like that, the narrative changed. I wasn't the cold daughter anymore. I was the one who'd quietly held the family together, and who finally stopped. By the end of the week, neighbors were dropping off little kindnesses. A potted succulent. A card that simply read, "You're not alone." A tray of lemon bars from the Jensen boys, who remembered how I used to babysit them after school. Even Mr. Lewis, who rarely spoke to anyone, offered to fix the broken gate latch with, "You've done more than your share. Let someone else take a turn." And still the tent remained. Inside, my parents clung to denial. Jessica clung to her phone and passive-aggressive posts. But the power had shifted, and not just legally, socially, personally, emotionally. I had rewritten the script, and now, people weren't asking what I had done. They were asking why I waited so long to do it. Spring had arrived by the time they came back. Not with luggage or declarations, but with that same look they'd always worn when they wanted something softened. Sympathy as performance. Jessica stood on the porch first, dressed in muted pastels, her voice feather-light. "We just need to talk, please." Patricia hovered behind her, silent for once. Maybe shame, maybe strategy. I wasn't sure anymore. I opened the door but didn't step aside. It had been 3 months since the eviction. The tent vanished weeks ago. They had stayed with relatives, maybe a motel after that. I hadn't asked. I didn't need to know, because something had shifted, permanently. Jessica cleared her throat. We've had time to think, to reflect. I said. About what, exactly? Her voice wavered. How things got complicated. I raised an eyebrow. Patricia stepped forward, finally finding her voice. You made your point, Emily. You've shown us how much we relied on you. It's clear now. I said nothing. Jessica leaned in slightly. Can we come back? Just until we get stabilized. The house, it's always been home. I looked between them, and then behind them. At the clean porch I had painted myself. At the garden I had planted with my own hands. At the home that finally felt like one. I inhaled deeply and let my words come without anger. Just truth. This house isn't about beds, I said. It's about respect. And that's something none of you offered, until the faucet ran dry and the bills stopped getting paid. Patricia looked stunned. Jessica opened her mouth, then shut it again. I continued, calm as stone. You didn't lose your place here because of one decision. You lost it because you treated me like a spare part in a home I carried. You erased me, then expected me to thank you for it. Jessica's eyes glistened. But we're family. Exactly, I said. And family doesn't make you sleep on the floor in your own house. I stepped back, letting the weight of silence settle between us. Then I added, with a clarity I didn't even know I was capable of, I'm not angry anymore, but I'm done. And with that, I closed the door, turned the lock, and let the final click echo, not as punishment, but as punctuation. The end of an old chapter, the beginning of a new one. Inside, I returned to my reading nook, the one I built with quiet hands and louder courage. Outside, the porch emptied, footsteps fading. I didn't look back through the window. I didn't need to, because I knew, for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself, and I would never unchoose me again. Thank you for following Emily's journey. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself in a space that once felt like home, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Was there a moment when you finally drew a line? Let's talk about it. And if this story resonated, hit the like button and subscribe for more first-person stories about finding strength in the places we least expect it. Because sometimes the quietest ones, they're the ones you should never underestimate.